Maybe emo kids weren't being dramatic. Maybe they were just early. Now, before I go on, I am a huge advocate of mental health. And part of that reason is because I have crippling anxiety, I have severe depression, complex PTSD, and bipolar that sends me into episodes that flip flop so fast that it would make a normal person's head explode. 12 years ago, I was seconds away from checking out of life. Literally had my finger on the little piece of the life-ending tool, and I just had this flash before my eyes of my kids and how it would affect them, which is why I owe my kids the world. They literally saved my life. And that's also why I will never judge anyone for responding or reacting a certain way to life events. But thinking back about the emo craze of the early 2000s, I do laugh. Boys were growing bangs and covering half their face. They were wearing skinny jeans that made girls jealous that they couldn't fit into them. They were wearing eyeliner. It was like depression was being displayed for the whole world to see. But here's an aspect of that emo craze that I've never heard anybody talk about before. Some of us didn't have an
Emo phase?
because we were drowning in depression in real life. Some of us couldn't get out of bed because we felt the literal weight of the world on our shoulders. And I'm not saying that emo kids weren't really depressed, but there is a percentage of those emo kids that were doing it just because that was the thing to do at the time. But what I've found is those of us that do have a harder time with life and with depression don't like to advertise it to the world. We don't like to bother people with our problems. We don't like to feel like a burden. But one thing I did love about the emo craze is the music. Some of my favorite bands and music come from that era. But there's a big difference between displaying depression like a badge of honor and not being able to get out of bed because life doesn't feel like it's worth living. Neil Brennan is a famous writer and comedian. He was one of the creators of The Chappelle Show. He continues to write. He's a regular guest on Joe Rogan. Years ago, it's got to be older than a decade, he went on Joe Rogan's podcast and he was talking about his depression and the different avenues he took for treatment and stuff. And he painted it in a picture that nobody had ever painted it before that I've heard. And I related with it way more than I've related with anything I've ever even said or heard about depression. He said people with depression are literally walking down the streets feeling a physical weight on their shoulders. You know, people move through life slower because of depression, but that's because they literally feel a weight. Always kept that quote with me, and I always thought about it, but it never clicked until about 5 years ago when I really started taking my mental health seriously. And as I started facing it head on and healing, it started to get lighter. I started walking more. I started doing things that I love more. And it felt easier to do those things because it felt like a literal weight had been lifted off my shoulders. So poke fun at emo kids all you want. It is kind of funny, but maybe they weren't just being dramatic and maybe they were just early. And even though there's still a huge stigma around mental health, especially mental health in men, but imagine where we'd be without that emo phase of the early 2000s. And we still have light years to go.